For 15 weeks, Israel has been in crisis. The mass demonstrations triggered by government judicial reforms, the protesters showing no sign of giving up. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu paused the overhaul last month, offering no compromises. But will he? My guest is the American lawyer and former Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, often labelled Israel's lead attorney in the court of public opinion. He talks directly to the Israeli Prime Minister.
He wants balance. He used the word balance 4 times with me. He's willing to accept compromise, and I think there will be compromise.
So where does this stalemate lead, and how much damage is it doing to Israel at home and abroad? And what about America's own judicial system and the case, or even cases, against former President Trump? How much trouble is he in? Alan Dershowitz, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you.
For many years, you've defended Israel through thick and thin, come what may, but not this time. What was the point at which you said, I can't support this and I need to go public with my concerns?
Well, I've always been somebody who supported Israel's right to exist and be strong and be the nation state of the Jewish people, but I've been critical of many of its policies starting from 1970. I favored the two-state solution, I always have. And I've opposed any Israeli efforts to block the two-state solution. I've met with Israeli leaders. I've met with Palestinian leaders. I met with Abbas. I met with Fayyad. I think a solution to the problem is within reach, but neither side has been willing to make the so-called painful compromises that are required. On this issue, of course, I'm a lawyer, and I've been a lawyer for 60 years, and I care deeply about the judicial process. And so I thought that a new administration, the Netanyahu administration, went too far in its efforts to weaken the Supreme Court. But I want to emphasize that I don't believe this is the business of anybody but Israelis. This is a domestic issue. It would be as if there was an argument in Germany about whether to weaken the constitutional court. The rest of the world wouldn't participate in that. But whenever Israel is involved in anything, no matter how domestic it is, it becomes an international concern. The European community should butt out of this. I have offered my assistance, but I've offered it in a constructive, positive way. And so I think Israel should resolve this issue. Whichever way it resolves it, it will remain one of the most vibrant democracies in the world, as evidenced by the protests we see on both sides, and no attempt to try to stop the protests. So Israel will remain a vital and vibrant democracy, whichever way this comes out. I think it will be a better democracy if it allows the Supreme Court to continue its efforts on behalf of civil rights, minority rights, human rights, and a range of other issues. But let's not overstate the problem, because I think many people on both sides have overstated it.
Well, you have pointed yourself to some dangers in some of the legal changes that have been discussed, in particular rules of engagement for the security services. You yourself said in an interview there were proposals to have different rules of engagement based on race and ethnicity. So shooting live ammunition depending on whether you're Arab or Jew. No international court would ever uphold that. That's a pretty horrifying proposal, isn't it?
Yes, and Bibi Netanyahu has said that, and he has assured me personally in meetings, and he's assured the Israeli public that he would never allow that completely insane proposal to go forward. Even the man who made the proposal, and it was made by one man named Ben-Gvir, has withdrawn it. So again, this is an example of a debate within Israel that has become internationalized, that has become exaggerated. I don't think 1% of Israelis would agree with that conclusion. One Israeli stated it, withdrew it. The government has said they would never accept it, and I would hope that the Supreme Court would immediately reject it if it came to be. By the way, obviously, the Palestinians have that rule of engagement. They feel it perfectly appropriate to murder Jewish children and Jewish women and Jewish old people without any hesitation, and the world seems to condemn more one Israeli who makes an absurd proposal than the entire Palestinian government that acts on the distinction between Jews and non-Jews. So let's keep our priorities straight.
Well, presumably you don't object to the Jewish diaspora having plenty to say about what's going on in Israel, do you?
They don't know what they're talking about, most of them. Most of them just simply support the left in Israel, as I do, and they don't understand the judicial reform issue. And the diaspora is split, as it would be. You know, the old expression, two Jews, three opinions. So don't expect anything different. The vast majority of Israelis support a democracy. They support making peace with the Palestinians. They support a strong Israeli Supreme Court. But because of the contingencies of government, the 5 elections in 4 years, in order to form a government, Netanyahu had to include people with whom he disagrees. When I was last in Israel,
and you disagree with the people he's brought in, and you disagree with these people he's brought in.
Fundamentally disagree with them, and I met with them, and I told them I disagree with them. But look, I disagree with many people in the American government. I probably would disagree with many people in the German government if I got to know more about them.
Well, I mean, you have no concern that Itamar Ben-Gvir, for instance, a man convicted of a number of charges, including supporting a terrorist organization and incitement to racism. It's hardly a perfect qualification for a public security minister in Israel these days, is it?
What democracy is all about, and that's why many Israelis will vote against the government. That's what you do in a democracy. And in a democracy, you allow the government to appoint people. Some countries have rules prohibiting former convicted people from serving in the government. Some governments do not. In the United States, we once had a man run for president from prison. We've also had a man be the mayor of Boston from prison. So you don't judge a country by its most extreme elements. And I fundamentally disagree with virtually everything Ben-Gvir says. And I met him and I told him so to his face. And the same thing is true with several of the other people. But
you've got to judge a government by its willingness to bring people like that into its ranks, haven't you? Because it smacks of what? Desperation. I've got to prop up this coalition, even by bringing in people who are so unpopular in the country and abroad. You've got to take measures like that. It smacks of desperation, doesn't it?
In England, of course, when the British government not only included but had as its minority leader a rampant anti-Semite, who was then defeated in the marketplace of ideas. In the United States, we have what's called the Squad, a group of people who are very active in the Democratic Party, who are virulently anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. And we have people in the Republican Party, one yesterday, who was called out for his anti-Semitism and his bigotry. So I think every democracy, when you have a broad coalition, it's going to include people who you don't agree with. I think you judge a government by its leader. And Netanyahu won the election fair and square. It was a very close election. The winning margin was about 49.7 to 49.2. And when you have a government like that in a coalition system, you're going to get people in it who fundamentally disagree. Frankly, it's none of Germany's business, and it's none of Europe's business. This is a domestic issue that Israel can resolve. This is the first time in the history of the world, where judicial reform has become a subject of international concern. Let Israel solve its own problems. It will. There are demonstrations. Netanyahu has pulled back.
These are unprecedented demonstrations, aren't they? These are unprecedented condemnations coming from Jewish groups around the world. There hasn't been anything like that, has there?
And that's a good sign. It shows that democracy is alive and well, and that it's frankly none of the business of the European community. Why does the European community care whether or not the Israeli Supreme Court requires standing in order to bring a lawsuit? Why does the European community care if there's a judicial override on political decisions? You know, the Supreme Court of Israel is the most influential and powerful Supreme Court anywhere in the world, even more powerful and influential than the German Constitutional Court. And so there are people, many people, the majority of Israelis want to limit that power. The issue is how much you limit the power. I want to limit it only a little bit. The government wants to limit it more than a little bit. But frankly, mind your own business. Take care of European concerns. Don't concern yourself so deeply with Israeli domestic issues. It is a form of anti-Semitism to focus so obsessively on every domestic issue in Israel. No other country in the world receives that kind of negative attention and criticism.
So far, Prime Minister Netanyahu's answer to all the protests and the criticism has been, by law, I won the election. This is what people voted for. It's called democracy, so suck it up. The Israeli historian Yuval Harari dismissed that as the oldest trick in the book. He said, first you use the law to gain power, and then you use your power to distort the law. Has he got a point?
That's a form of Holocaust denial. That's essentially saying that what Netanyahu has done is like what Hitler did. It's just what Mussolini did. It's absurd. There are elections in Israel. The Knesset, the Likud, the right-wing parties have a very small minority. They probably will lose their majority. They will not be able to hold on to power. There is nothing that Netanyahu is doing that in any way resembles what's happened in Europe. And the opposition to Netanyahu has turned racist, has turned bigoted, has turned anti-Semitic, even among Jews. And that's a tragedy. And the biggest tragedy is that the European community thinks this is their business. This is not the concern of Norway, of Sweden, of Germany, of Italy, how Israel resolves its domestic disputes.
You've known the Prime Minister for many years and you've put your concerns directly to him. What did he say to you?
He wants balance. He used the word balance 4 times with me. He's willing to accept compromise, and I think there will be compromise. I can tell you I spoke not only to the Prime Minister, I've spoken to the President, I've spoken to Alvin Bragg, the man who created the judicial revolution. I've spoken to Gantz, I've spoken to Sharansky. Everybody in Israel wants 2 things. One, it wants to resolve this in a pragmatic and balanced way. And 2, it wants to keep the attention of the world on proper problems, on problems of terrorism, on problems of Iran. Those are the concerns of the European community, that Iran is developing a nuclear bomb. It is not the concern of the international community that Israel is having a dispute about judicial reform. Israel is retaining its status as a great and vibrant democracy and as a fighter against terrorism. I will continue to support it while being critical of particular aspects of Israeli policy. That's the way democracy works.
What explains the fact that Mr. Netanyahu had never shown the slightest desire to weaken the Supreme Court until, of course, the state of Israel decided to put him on trial? You yourself said he was right back then, referring to his previous views, and he's wrong now. Isn't it clear that his motivation, primary motivation, is to stay in power with whoever will back him and whatever price they demand and stay out of jail?
How is that different from any other politician in the world? Every politician wants to, particularly in coalition governments, create coalitions that will keep them in power. There's nothing in the judicial reform, which in any way impacts on the criminal charges against him. I've gone through all the criminal charges against him. I do not think they are valid. I have advised him that and advised others that. I've spoken to the Attorney General. And I believe that the effort to try to get judicial reform is very widespread in Israel.
You said the charges against Mr. Netanyahu are not valid in your view. They're serious charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. Why aren't they valid?
Well, because there's no Israeli law that says that a certain number of gifts exceeds the authority, and you can't make it up as you go along. So that's the charge number 1. On the most serious charge, it's that he agreed to help a newspaper or a media company in exchange for getting good publicity or the absence of bad publicity. Every politician in the world has done that. What's the first job a politician gives? He creates a media consultant because he wants to know that if he votes a certain way, the media will give him good attention. So I think that the charges against him have gone way too far. I predict they will not result in felony convictions. And if they do, and if they result in convictions based on moral turpitude, he will be precluded from running. But there's nothing in the judicial reform which has any effect on the current pending trial. So I think it's wrong to say that the reason he's behind this judicial reform is to protect himself. I think the reason he's behind this judicial reform is to maintain his coalition in power. That's correct. And that's political, and that's what happens in democracies based on coalitions.
Mr. Netanyahu's former chief of staff, former director general of the Prime Minister's office, is warning in very stark terms that he's not going to end this affair quietly. Yuval Horowitz told a newspaper he won't rest until the entire court system is on the floor asking for forgiveness. He's a master of manipulation and campaigning. Do you recognize him from that description?
No, he's just dead wrong. In my conversations with him, he wants balance. He wants a compromise. He wants an approach. He doesn't want to destroy the Supreme Court. He wants to make the Supreme Court of Israel more like the Supreme Court of the United States, Canada, New Zealand, England, and many other countries. Right now, the Supreme Court of Israel has far more power than any Supreme Court in the world today. It's the only Supreme Court that strike down legislation it deems to be unreasonable. The only Supreme Court that doesn't require standing before you bring a case, so any NGO can bring a case. And these are reasonable debates. These are debates that have occurred in the United States over the years.
You said earlier that Mr. Netanyahu is looking for compromise. I'm wondering where that compromise will be, especially if he keeps someone like Ben-Gvir or Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, in his cabinet. What room is there for compromise if those two remain in office?
3 or 4 examples. One compromise would be to allow override on political and economic decisions, but not on core human rights and civil liberties and minority rights decisions. I proposed that to Benjamin Netanyahu, and he seemed very sympathetic to that. The other would be to create a commission for the appointment of justices, which is more like the commissions that exist in most other states. It's called the Missouri Plan in the United States. So there's much room for compromise.
And the far right? Does the far right want to see compromise?
And the far left doesn't want to see compromise. The reason we don't have compromise is you have extremists on both sides. You have extremists on the left that will not accept any degree of a reduction of power of the Supreme Court. And you have people on the right who won't accept anything else. And when you have the extremists winning, when you have both sides extremists winning, the atmosphere for compromise is not usually so suitable. But I think the center in Israel, the vast majority of Israelis, the polls show, would like some degree of compromise.
You're on record as saying you want to see Arab rights protected in Israel. If these judicial reforms go ahead, what will those protections be worth?
Well, the protections are implicit in the Declaration of Independence of Israel, which the courts have said have to be given some weight. Remember that the status of an Arab in Israel is much, much more secure than the status of any Arab in any Arab country in the Middle East.
That's not saying much, though, is it?
Well, no, it's saying a lot today when you have countries like Egypt and Jordan and others that promote. But you have to look at it comparatively. Israeli Arabs vote. They serve in the Knesset. They serve on the Supreme Court. They are professors at major universities. They're subject to affirmative action. The status of Arabs in Israel is better than the status of Arabs in countries in the Middle East. It should be better. It should improve.
But we have the latest human rights report by the US government, the State Department, Israel's closest ally, and the message is as bleak as ever, talking about significant human rights abuses, including credible reports of unlawful or arbitrary killings, arbitrary detention, often extraterritorial detention of Palestinians. It's not a great recommendation, is it?
Israel's record of human rights is better than any country in the world faced with comparable threats. No country faced with comparable threats of terrorism, of nuclear attacks from Iran, of attacks from within. No country has a better record of human rights.
All right. Professor Dershowitz, let's talk about Donald Trump. You've brought out a new book which looks at some of the legal issues facing the former president, indeed. Let's be clear, you're no supporter of Trump politically. You haven't voted for him. You said you won't be voting for him. But you think the charges he's facing are laughable and blatantly political. Why?
Well, let's take the charges in New York. What the DA in New York is basically saying is when somebody... The district attorney of New York basically saying is when somebody pays hush money to prevent an allegation of an adulterous affair from being made public to his wife, to his family, to his voters, to his business associates, he must immediately put the exact reason why he paid that money in a corporate public forum. Nobody in history has ever done that. Nobody in history will ever do that. It's an absurd charge. It's selective prosecution. I am not in favor of Donald Trump. I hope he loses his election. And I also hope if there are charges that are valid against him, that he's prosecuted and convicted. But I don't want to see the criminal law stretched, the Constitution contracted in order to get Trump. It's a very great danger. Particularly, it's a great danger because Trump is an easy person to go after because he has so many flaws and fallacies. But the distinction between voting against somebody, which I do, and prosecuting them for a non-crime is a very serious one. And I want to maintain that line very strongly.
If you're right, how is it that the US legal system is so open to abuse that a high-profile prosecutor like the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg can get away with, as you put it, a blatantly political set of charges that have no merit? That's a very dangerous precedent, isn't it?
Oh, it is. America foolishly accepted the concept of voting for prosecutors. We elect prosecutors. It's absurd to elect prosecutors. No other country, no other democracy in the world elects prosecutors and elects judges. And so you have prosecutors who are Democrats, who are Republicans, and they follow their constituents. And you have people like the district attorney and the attorney general of New York running for office on the promise to get Trump. The name of my book, Get Trump, is not original with me. It comes from the campaign promises of the district attorney. It would be unthinkable in Germany, unthinkable in Great Britain, unthinkable in France for a prosecutor to run for office, number one, and number two, promise in advance that he was going to get somebody and then rummage through the statutes to try to find something against him. And when he couldn't find anything in the statute books, to create a crime. So the American criminal justice system, which I have been teaching about and practicing for 60 years, is in great danger. And I want to do something about preventing that while also maintaining my strong opposition to Donald Trump as a candidate and as a president.
So how do you take the politics out of the US legal system if the courts are stuffed with political appointees?
You stop electing prosecutors and you stop appointing them and you start appointing them on the merits. You start creating civil service jobs in which people get promoted as prosecutors based on the quality of their work, not on the political positions they take. The United States legal system, particularly its criminal justice system, is in desperate need of reform.
Is it going to get it?
No, it's not going to get it because people don't care about criminal justice. People don't care about judicial reform. That's my point about both Trump and about what's going on in Israel. They use judicial reform as a way of achieving their political ends.
You've said Trump's case reminds you of your time dealing with civil rights in the south of the country, where if the sheriff said you'd spat on the sidewalk and charged you with it, there's no chance you'd get acquitted by an all-white jury. Everybody knew that. You said you were innocent, but everyone knew you were going to get convicted. Is it still like that?
It does remind me of it in the sense that you can't get a fair jury trial in Manhattan where people voted for the district attorney on the promise that he would get Trump. Now these same people are going to serve on juries, and they're going to try to help the district attorney who they voted for get Trump. Now, what is it? 87% of people in Manhattan voted against Trump. The case should be moved to a different area where it's more like 50-50.
Because you can't get a fair trial in New York. Is that it?
In Manhattan, you can't get a fair trial. No, I can tell you that Abraham Lincoln, Daniel Webster, Jesus Christ, and Mohammed could not get him an acquittal in the city of New York. Maybe a hung jury, possibly a hung jury, but you're not going to get 12 jurors who will say, we are willing to be the person to let Donald Trump go free and become the next president of the United States. There's so much opposition to Trump in New York. Understandable.
Do you see other trials coming Trump's way? What are the chances that he might face prosecution over his alleged attempt to overturn the 2020 election result in Georgia? There was this leaked conversation with Georgia's Secretary of State where he tried to pressure the man to find additional votes to flip the result. Also his role in the January 6 riots, if there is a role that he played. Do these incidents still pose legal dangers for him?
What he did on January 6th was terrible, inexcusable. And he did bear moral responsibility for what happened in the Capitol thereafter. But he used the words, I want you to go and demonstrate peacefully and patriotically. And that brings his speech within the First Amendment. And so, therefore, I don't think there is a legitimate case against him for January 6th. As far as Georgia is concerned, he said he wants people to find votes, not create, manufacture, or concoct, but to look to see if there are any uncounted votes. Whatever he meant, I don't know. He may have meant something different, but that's what he said. The strongest case against him is in Florida, where he did possess classified material improperly. And the problem with that is political. It'd be very hard to prosecute him without also going after President Biden and former Vice President Pence, who also had classified material in their possession. But he's in danger. Look, I don't think Trump will be the next president of the United States. I don't think he has the votes among the general public to be elected again.
Alan Dershowitz, it's been great to have you on Conflict Zone. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
You've asked me hard and great questions, and I always enjoy answering hard questions. So thank you for your excellent questions.
Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.